I'm a freelance writer. I'm a storyteller and host of the podcast, The Only One in the Room. I really want to start off by thanking Marilyn and Jeff so much for asking me to teach this class. I did not graduate from high school. I didn't go to college. So in a very odd way, the writing pad has been my institute of higher learning. And I've told other people this story. After my divorce, I decided I wanted to kind of shift gears. My kids were almost grown, not quite grown, and I looked at writing. So I started a blogging class there. I went on to take a podcasting class. And I mean, I've taken so many classes there. I've taken storytelling, took storytelling last year. And I'll tell you a little bit about that because it was a pretty amazing experience. So everything that I've learned there has allowed me to create what I have today, and I really appreciate it. This is my first time teaching a virtual class, so please be patient because I'm going to navigate everything. The benefit for me in teaching virtually is I get to look at my notes, which you might see me doing from time to time. So just a little bit about me, my writings. I write, and some of you may have gotten this by email or seen it, but I write about race. I write about three things. I write about race. I write about my recovery from drugs and alcohol and addiction, and I write about relationships. And so all kinds of relationships, but mainly romantic ones. Writing about race makes my writing political, which I don't think it should make it political. I think that those two things are inextricably combined now. So that's the way it is. So my writings have become political. As a disruptor, I found that I cannot be afraid to make anyone uncomfortable. If I'm afraid, I'm not going to tell my truth, and I don't tell my truth, then there's really no point in even writing it. My first piece was I was the only Black woman at Elizabeth Gilbert and Cheryl Strayed's retreat. That was my first published piece, and that was in HuffPost, and that was in October 2018. My last piece, the last piece I had published, and I've had quite a few in between, was a piece called White Women, I'm Glad You're Showing Up, but I'm Not Sure I Can Trust You Just Yet. And surprisingly, I received almost as much pushback from that first article as I did from the last one. So whenever I'm getting ready to talk about race in public, I have to make sure that I'm prepared to do so. So about storytelling. I love storytelling. I took storytelling in the summer of 2018, my first storytelling class at the writing pad. It was a 5-week summer course. I left that course and entered moth after moth after moth. I didn't always get called up onto the stage, but the first time I did, I won the Story Slam, which was incredible. I can't explain to you what an incredible feeling that was. And then I participated in a Grand Slam, which I did not win, but it was okay because my writing pad classmate, Rich Monahan, was actually competing in that same Grand Slam, and he was the winner. And I just loved him so much. So if I couldn't win, I was so glad that it could be Rich. And it was so cool that we had both gone through the same kind of journey together. So when I took the first storytelling class, we have kind of like a graduation performance. And at that performance, there were a couple of people who were actually scouting for their storytelling shows. So I got nabbed right away to participate in another one and then another one. And I did storytelling shows for about 1.5 years, kind of straight. Like I was doing them every month to 6 weeks. And it was awesome. And there were all different kinds of shows, all different kinds of people, all different lengths. Some had to be memorized, some didn't. I had been trained at the writing pad to memorize my performances, 5 minutes or less, be really succinct. So that's kind of what I still do, but it's really nice to see the variety of storytelling performances that are available. And if you haven't gone to any, which I hadn't when I started the class, I really encourage you to do so. Right now they're virtual, of course, but there's still a lot of performances around. So for people of color, storytelling is in our blood. Congressman John Lewis, who is a standard bearer of the civil rights movement and equity in this country, he says that the movement without storytelling is like a bird without wings. All people of color, all of us, come from a long line of storytellers. And we seek out the stories that shed light on who we are in this country. For Black people, it came with us from the islands and from the Great Migration. It's peppered with jokes and with gospel and with Aretha and hip hop and jazz. Stories including the razor edge ones of lynching and segregation and police brutality, those are like the ties that bind us. But there are stories of being brought up in segregated neighborhoods, stories of protests, stories of prejudice, of allyship. There is no question that storytelling is a way of saying that I am here and I matter. And to all of our white allies in this class, and I know you're out there because some of you messaged me, please know that you are welcome and your voices are valued, and we can't wait to hear your stories too. So, the goals for this class are, we would like you to be able to come away with the tools to tell your own 5-minute story, or you tell your own story, forget the time limit. The moth, which is, the grand storytelling stage for everyone, that's a 5-minute story there. But we want you to come away with the tools of telling your own story, of being able to record it, and then put it out into the world, because we want to flood the internet with your beautiful stories after we're done, which would be a fantastic thing to see. So that's what we're hoping, is that you come away from this with a story spine, the outline of your story. You can tell your story, you can record it, and then put it out into the internet. And hopefully, you'll get enough feedback on the way to feel comfortable doing that from me and from Marilyn and Jeff. So stories versus anecdotes. A story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So there are 3 acts: Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Act 1 is you create a desire in the audience. You're going to see an example of my story, one of my stories that I told. And in that, you'll see that the first act is that I desire not to go to Richmond with my boyfriend and have a scary confrontation with his racist father. That's what I desire. So that's the first act. The second act makes the audience think that the desire won't come true. So my act 2 is that I find out that that my boyfriend had not yet told his father that I was Black. He was too afraid. So then I think I've made a huge mistake in going. And then the third act, which is the climax, is that it comes true. Not the scary thing in the middle, but that the desire that I had in the beginning comes true. So that third act in my story is that his father and I have a beautiful moment together. So I did not have a scary confrontation with him. So those 3 things: you want to create a desire in the audience, you want to make the audience think that the dream won't come true, and then you want it to come true so that there's like this relief, but you really want to kind of hang them up there. Stories need to have an emotional arc. There should be stakes involved. I had a great deal at stake in this story that you'll see. I was really scared. There was race involved. I was going to a strange place for the first time to meet somebody who presumably would not like me. So I had a lot at stake, but it was my boyfriend's father. So I wanted to make my boyfriend happy. So you want to see the stakes. You want to be able to see how the narrator has changed or shifted as a result of some event in your story. And an anecdote, on the other hand, an anecdote is like a short, amusing story, usually to make a point. For example, if I was going to lecture my kids on drunk driving, I might tell them a story, an anecdote rather, about someone who was injured while driving under the influence. That story wouldn't have to have stakes or a beginning, middle, and end. It would just be a story about someone who was injured, but it would prove my point to them. Sometimes anecdotes are funny, but they're always kind of short examples of what's going on. So we're not doing anecdotes here. We want to tell full stories. For the moth, 5 minutes or less is the key. I think it's a good thing to shoot for because it keeps the story succinct. 5 minutes goes by really fast. When I was starting, it felt like it went forever, but it just goes by like that. And you'll be amazed at what you can get across in 5 minutes. I was. And then you'll hear other stories and you'll hear how other people craft their stories to tell amazing stories in less than 5 minutes. And I think it's, you know, when you have more than one story being told at a time, like if you're at a storytelling show and there are 10 stories, you really don't want to sit through 10, 15-minute stories. 5 minutes really keeps the audience engaged and keeps people with you. So you want to be as specific as possible with your story. You want to use really clear, simple details. I say you want it to be as voicey as possible, meaning you want it to be how you talk. You don't want to do it in some voice that you think the audience might connect to. You want to do it like you would talk to your friends. I think the voiciest stories are the absolute best one. It's how I try to write. I try to write with my voice. Sometimes I write stuff down in a story and then I'll go back and shift everything into my voice after I've gotten the idea down, because my voice is what makes it compelling. So you want to be as specific, you want to use clear, simple details, you want it to be in your voice. Let yourself get excited, let yourself get sad, let yourself get angry if that's where it's going, which leads into being vulnerable. And that means revealing something that you're ashamed of or afraid of if appropriate. Make yourself the worst person in your story and talk about what you learned from the experience so it doesn't sound bitter. You want to be sympathetic. Share things you wouldn't normally share. Like the story I won the Moth with was a story about my being drug tested after having gone to rehab. It was an absolutely humiliating experience. I never thought I would share it with anybody. But the audience connected because I was willing to be vulnerable with them. I got real with them. I actually was able to find some humor in it. And, you know, not that the whole story has to be funny, but it's really nice to be able to find some humor even, and you'll see I don't know if you watch Pam Burrell's story, but it's a serious story, but there are a couple of light moments, and you'll see in mine when we watch it. So you want to be able to get vulnerable. It makes you sympathetic. You want to share things you wouldn't normally share, you know, when appropriate. You don't want to share things just for a tabloid value, though, either. You don't want to try to shock people. You want to share it because it comes from a really humble place, and you're really revealing something about yourself that will allow you to connect to your audience. And so the story spines. And Marilyn, is that where we are right now? We should go to the story spines?
Yeah. Do you want me to share it on the screen?
Yeah, would you mind? That'd be great. Okay, excellent. We're getting it together, people. There we go. Yeah. So the story spine. It's a 3-act structure like I talked about before. You're going to have Act 1, which is the beginning, Act 2, which is the middle, Act 3, which is the end. And you're going to start it with, and you're actually going to write this down, once upon a time, and then you'll explain the circumstances. And I actually have one here, as an example, from The Incredibles. Or we can do mine too. There's The Incredibles one. Yeah. You just go back up a little bit. Yeah, there it goes. This is an easy one because most people have seen The Incredibles and they can kind of get with the story. And even if you haven't seen it, you can kind of attach more to what the story is in the, you know, within the spine. So once upon a time, there was a superhero named Mr. Incredible who was forced to live as an ordinary man in a society where superheroes were outlawed. That's our once upon a time. Every day, he grew more and more frustrated with his stifling, boring life. But one day, he accepted a secret superhero job from a mysterious stranger. Because of that, he fell into a diabolical trap of this mysterious stranger who turned out to be Syndrome, a supervillain with a longtime grudge against Mr. Incredible. Because of that, Syndrome was able to capture and imprison Mr. Incredible. Because of that, Syndrome could now put his master plan into motion by setting a giant killer robot loose on civilization until finally Mr. Incredible escaped from his prison and foiled the villain by destroying the giant killer robot. And ever since then, he was loved by all and willing to be a superhero again. So that is a basic story spine. Someone was kind enough to break the Incredibles down into a story spine for us. And what Marilyn was showing you also was that I made up a story spine for my story. Can we show that one, Marilyn? Oh, Dee Rodriguez loves that. Great, I do too. I think it's awesome. Yeah, while we're getting to my story, so you'll see that I'm going to show you my the storytelling video from the class graduation from the writing pad, and I can just go over the interracial story spine. I called it interracial. That's the name of the story you're going to watch, the storytelling piece that you're going to watch, like enter the room, E-N-T-E-R, because I'm entering a room and racial is the thing. So mine goes, once upon a time, I was in love with a white man named Scott who grew up in Richmond. Oh, you're going to show the story. Are we going to play the story now? And then I can do the story spine afterward? Okay. Looks like we're playing the story now. So my boyfriend Scott and I had been together for a little over a year when his dad Harry had a stroke. I had never met Scott's parents. They lived in Richmond, Virginia. I live in Los Angeles. But Scott had told me that when he was a little boy, he remembered his dad using a particular word when referring to the black people that worked for him. A word that even then hurt and confused him. You know what word I'm talking about. So Scott was on the next plane, but I decided I was just fine if I never met this racist man, so I chose to stay put. But a couple weeks later, he called me, and he had this desperation in his voice. They don't know how much longer he has. Can you please come? I had never been to Richmond before. I was glued to the window of the cab that picked me up from the airport. Oh, so this is Richmond, land of Thomas Jefferson, home of big tobacco and Confederate statues. Scotty meets me in the lobby of the hospital, and as we're riding up together in the elevator to the ICU, he tells me that he and his mom Nancy hadn't yet had a chance to tell Harry about me. And I'm like, you mean you didn't tell him your girlfriend was coming all the way from LA today to meet him? He said, yeah, we told him my girlfriend was coming. We just didn't get around to telling him that you're black yet. So we get off the elevator, he kisses me, he holds my hand, he says it'll be fine, he'll love you. Mom and I are gonna go in and break the news, and then I'll come back out here and get it over this way right here. Break the news, great. So I'm in this waiting room, I'm all by myself, I'm pacing back and forth, my heart starts pounding, my mouth is dry, I'm like, why didn't I stop for water? What if this is a huge mistake? What if Harry is so angry about my being black that he has another stroke? Just then this black woman appears at the door, like on cue. And then she's immediately followed by what must have been her entire family. Most of them are crying, a couple of the younger ones are laughing. One large woman is giving orders, and no one looks at me. They just keep filing in, and I'm just sitting there like a fly on the wall. And then Scott appears in the doorway. And I just sit there and drink him in for a moment because he's blonde and tan and handsome, and he looks so vulnerable, and he looks so scared, and he looks so confused. He doesn't know where I am. This black family has filled in every inch of space around me, and he has no idea where I actually am in this room. And I watch his increasingly panicked expression as he scans the waiting room back and forth looking for me. And I laugh as I picture him thinking, which one is mine? So I get up and wave, and he smiles with relief, and he asks me if I'm ready, and I'm like, yeah. So we go into the ICU, and I see his mom, Nancy, standing in front of one of the units. And I know it's her because he told me that she has MS and uses a small 3-wheeled walker to get around. And when I get close to her, she reaches out and gives me this hug. And it's this long, emotional hug. Not at all what I expected. And she says in this soft, fluttery Southern accent, he's ready to meet you, Laura. Only 2 at a time. We have 1 hour left till visiting time's over. So I take a deep breath and I step into the hospital room. And then I turn and I see Harry and I exhale. There's this small, frail-looking man with Scotty's blue eyes. And I'm like, oh my God. And Scott grabs my hand and walks me around to the side and he says, here she is, Dad. This is Laura. And he walked me around to his good side because Harry's stroke had paralyzed him completely on his left side and he couldn't talk, so he had a trach to help him breathe. And I said, hi. I'm so glad to finally meet you. And his eyes are really intense and I can't read his expression, but suddenly his right hand springs to life and it shimmies across this thin hospital blanket and grabs my hand. And he looks at Scott deliberately and he mouths the word, beautiful. And then he looks back at me and kisses the back of my hand with tremendous effort and mouths the word, beautiful, again. Well, I'm crying now, just crying full out. Scott's crying. Harry has tears streaming down his cheeks. Nancy's broken the 2 at a time rule and she's coming and she's crying too. And we all sit there and Harry motions for me to sit on the bed with him, next to him, and he doesn't let go of my hand. And we're like that for an hour. Just talking, the 4 of us, well, the 3 of us. He was nodding and listening, and the ICU nurse comes in and tells us it's time to go, and I'm sitting there and I recall the last line of that sign that I saw when I landed that morning. You can keep the change. Did I talk about that sign? No. Okay, so there was a sign that I saw when I landed. There was this crazy yellow pickup truck with a hand-painted sign in the back. And the sign said, give me my guns, my money, and my freedom. You can keep the change. And that was my introduction to Richmond. So I'm sitting there on the bed, and I'm thinking about the sign that I saw when I landed that morning, the last line of which was, you can keep the change. And it occurs to me that I had inwardly accused Harry of being prejudiced. But it was really I who had prejudged him for this hurtful word that he used almost 30 years ago. And the moment I walked into that hospital room, everything I thought about him previously flew out the window. This small, dying man with Scotty's blue eyes was willing to embrace me, full stop. So change wasn't just some liberal ideal. Real change was lying right there in that hospital bed in front of me. And if Harry could make that kind of change, then so could I. Thank you. Woo! It's so cool watching that back. It feels like it was so long ago, but it was not. It was less than 2 years ago, right, guys? Was it 20? Yeah, it was 2018. So now that you've seen the story, I'm going to break down the story spine for you. That was a much better idea because now you can hear it and see it and go over it with me. So, once upon a time, I was in love with a white man named Scott who grew up in Richmond, Virginia, and had confided in me that his father was a racist and might not approve of our relationship. When his father had a stroke just after our 1-year anniversary, Scotty flew back to Richmond to be with him. Every day, Scott would call me and ask me to come out there, and I would come up with some reason not to go. But one day, when he called, he was crying and said that Harry was dying and asked if I would please come. Because of that, I flew to Richmond and went straight to the hospital. Because of that, Scott told me that he hadn't yet told Harry that I was Black, and I'd need to wait in the waiting room until he did. Because of that, I got really nervous and I thought I'd made a huge mistake in coming. Until finally, when I met Scott's father, I was surprised to see how kind his eyes were, and he cried and proclaimed me beautiful while holding my hand. Ever since then, I realized that real change was not only possible, but it had happened the instant I walked through his hospital room door. I knew I had a friend and an ally in Harry, and he had one in me. So that is our stories, my story spine for that story. And the exciting thing is that you guys will get to create your own today for the stories that you're going to write and tell. And I don't know if do we have time to watch Pam's video, or should we just talk about her story spine?
Probably watch it.
Let's watch it.
Yeah.
It's so good.
It's really
So
good.
good. So for those of you who didn't get to watch Pam Burrell, she was that a Moth Grand Slam that she won?
Yeah.
Yeah. She's a Moth Grand Slam winner. She has this incredible story that we're going to watch right now, and then we'll go through her story spine afterward. That's me and Scott. After the storytelling.
I just wanted to ask if people could see, like, how could you see the video? Like, could you see the other moth things on the side? Because I'm trying to minimize it so that the mouth movements line up with the sound. I don't know if people could chat to me. Now I can't even see the chat.
Yeah.
Hang on
I
one
think
second.
we should try it.
Can you do it full screen?
Let's do it full screen, and then we can scale down the window.
Okay.
To
Yeah.
make it go faster.
Video. It says video is great.
Okay.
Okay. All right. I'm going to play this, and if there's a problem,
Just message us.
we won't be able to see it. So hopefully, Laura, you say something. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Right now it looks good.
I didn't know what I wanted to do after high school, but my mother did. She decided that I was going to attend a prestigious college, study pre-med, and become a doctor. I didn't have the courage to tell her that I lacked the self-confidence to make life and death decisions for other people. I also lacked the courage to resist her plan. But I did draw one non-negotiable line in the sand. If I had to go to college, it was going to be a traditional Black college in a large city. On my first day as a scholarship student at Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington, I discovered that I was the only Black woman in the entering class. I also discovered that my dorm room had been reconfigured so that my roommate and I wouldn't share a bedroom. I asked the residence manager why ours was the only room that had been changed around, and she said, "Well, we thought you'd feel more comfortable with that arrangement." So from my very first day, I was made to feel that I was an outsider who needed to be treated differently from my peers. I didn't know how to navigate that situation, and I spent the next 4 years trying to break a code I didn't understand. In my sophomore year, I volunteered with 11 other students at the Washington State Penitentiary, a maximum security prison. The main goal of the program was to help soon-to-be-released prisoners adapt to life on the outside. I had found my people. I have never felt more at home or more appreciated than I did with those men. They had lost control of their destiny. They were anxious, scared, and confused, but they were determined to succeed. They had each other's backs and supported each other through addictions and through helplessness and rage. Talking to them was the highlight of my week for almost 2 years. I never missed a meeting. Then one night, I drove to our designated meeting place on campus, and no one was there. I immediately recognized what had happened. The Ohio players, one of the biggest things to hit campus in years, were performing that night. I passed streams of concert goers as I drove the empty van to the prison. I was surprised by the intensity of my affection for these men. Looking back, I think I realized that they were where they were because they had acted on their feelings, and I was where I was because I had not. When I got to the prison, I decided to seat all of the men together in one group. As the 30 men settled in, one of the men said, "Where is everybody?" I told them about the concert, and another man said, "Don't you like the Ohio players?" I said, "They're one of my favorite bands." And he said, "Then what you doing here, fool?" And we all laughed. I said, "Well, I'd rather be here. I love you guys. I care about you. And I want to do everything I can to help you succeed." The room went deathly still. No one spoke. Finally, I asked the group what was wrong. One of the men began to cry and said, "In my whole life, no one has ever told me that they loved me or that they cared about me." Then, one by one, every man began to cry. After a while, one of the men pointed to the guard who was monitoring our group and said, "Look, even old Baldy is crying." Eventually, they went their way and I went mine. I don't know if that program helped those men, but I know it helped me. I still lack courage and self-confidence, but when I'm afraid or feeling challenged by the world, I think back to that special group of foster brothers of mine, and I tell myself, "Hey guys, we can get through this together." Thank you.
I love that story. Yeah, I mean, those are two very, they aren't that different actually, her story and mine, but they are different enough. But they have a lot of the same elements, which is cool for this class. So you can draw from that. So her story's fine. Once upon a time, a Black woman went to an almost all-white college and was made to feel different. Every day, she felt like an outsider. But one day, she volunteered with 11 other students to go meet with prisoners at the Washington State Penitentiary. Because of that, she found her people. Because of that, she felt part of something. Because of that, no matter what was going on in her life, she never missed a meeting. All the other volunteers went to see her favorite band, but she went to the prison anyway. Until finally, she told the prisoners that she skipped the concert because she loved them, and one by one, the men all started crying. Ever since then, she realized that she made as much difference in their lives as they made in hers. Simple, yet powerful. And I'll probably forget this later on, so I just want to make mention of the nice details that she used in her story, like driving the empty white van to the prison, when she could have just said she went to the prison anyway. But the image of her driving that empty van to the prison is so much more powerful, and it tells so much of a story. And you see how much she packed into 5 minutes of time, but without sounding rushed, without sounding like, you know, she was not scattered. She was very precise, but it was still, she had this ability to perform her story in a way that really brought you in, or brought me in anyway. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit, because we talked about the story spine, which is what we're going to, you know, work on today. But I want to talk a little bit about bookending, which is another style of storytelling. I know it as this one moment, but apparently it's called bookending. That's the official name. So you start before the climax, which is exactly how I write. I always write everything out, and then I pull the moment before the climax of the story out, and I put it at the top, and then I'll write the rest of the story and then come back to that moment. It's really effective, and it gives drama without sounding dramatic. So I'll just give you an example. You start the story with a brief scene that hooks the reader in. So here's the example that I was given. I'm 12 years old, standing in my parents' kitchen looking up at my father, who is so mad that his lips are sucked over his teeth, and he shoves a wanted poster in my face and says, "You are in some very serious trouble." So that's a dramatic moment to start with, and then you go into the rest of it. For my storytelling story, I could have started in the ICU waiting room, waiting for Scott to come back in and get me. And then, you know, and then I'll tell you what I would have done there. But that could have been that moment where I was so nervous to go in. That could have been the moment to start with. The moment before the climax, rather. You continue your story using the story spine. So that's convenient. Once upon a time, every day, until one day, and because of that, and because of that, and because of that, until finally. And the climax you are leading up to is the same scene you start with, hence the term bookend, as well as its conclusion, followed by the remaining story elements. Ever since that day, what I learned was fill in the blank. So that's bookending, and if you have questions about that, we can go over that later on, because I know I'm giving you a lot of information at once, and I'm sure some of you are taking notes, but and so I'll try not to go too fast, but don't worry if you miss something. I can always email it to you, or you can ask in the chat, and we can put whatever you need in the chat. Devices that I use in storytelling, I use our 5 senses. I talk about what I smell. I talk about what things felt like, what things tasted like, what I could see, obviously, what I hear. That's a really powerful device too, to talk about sound, the ticking of the clock, you know, the gunning of the motor, like those kind of things really make it visceral for the audience. And again, I know I said this already, but being clear, using simple language, not leaving mysteries, using a few vivid descriptions so that we can be there with you. Chekhov's gun, which is, for those of you who weren't familiar, like for me, who didn't go to college or high school, every element of your story should be relevant. Elements should not appear to make false promises that never come into play. Like, for example, in my story, I'm pretty sure that my first draft included the fact that I was newly sober at that time. It doesn't ever come back up again, so it wasn't really relevant to the story. It's an interesting fact. It could have been its own story, but it didn't really belong in the story of my meeting Harry. So it was cut out. So that would be a good example of not leaving mysteries, of Chekhov's gun. So words to avoid, and there's a lot of them, so I'm going to kind of go through them slowly. And these are just kind of cliched things that you hear in storytelling, and they can be a little cringy. They also are just not as effective at getting the audience to connect with you. So, oh, here they are. Thank you, Marilyn. So Words to avoid. Now, these are not my personal pet peeves, but that's what it says on this. These were actually my storytelling teacher gave this handout to us, and so they became my personal pet peeves. So you don't want to use fast forward or cut to. You don't want to use long story short. Do not use the word literally unless it is something you need to explain as literal. Don't say I was literally flying with joy when you weren't literally flying, when you were just happy. Use other words to explain it. Don't say I can't describe it. No one who's hearing a story wants to hear that you can't describe it. Describe it. Do what you can with the words, but describe it. I had no choice but to say or do. Of course you had a choice. Just, don't try to cheat your way into whatever you had to say or do. Just talk about why you did it. I'll never forget, I'll always remember. Those are just kind of crutch phrases. Spoiler alert. So at the start of a story. Oh, it's so hard not to start with so, but if you can help it, it makes it sound more polished. It really does. Before I knew it, the next thing I know, one thing led to another. It seemed like forever. Yeah. But anyway, those are just other crutches that you don't want to lean on. But that's another story. Then don't tell it in this one if it's another story. So that happened. Okay, that's just another crutch. You'll never believe. No, you're going to make us believe it. So don't start with you'll never believe. Really? And that's like, that kind of conversation you're having with yourself within the story. Just talk to your audience. Asking questions of the audience. Has anyone here ever been to Tasmania? This isn't a comedy act. Don't do that. Don't start with that. I know what you're thinking. No, you don't. So don't assume what anybody's thinking. Needless to say, that's back up there with I can't describe it, or there's another one. But anyway, unneeded exaggerations. Yeah, don't be hyperbolic. Any cliched or stock phrases. Examples: hit me like a ton of brick. Boom. Mic drop. A light bulb came on my head. No, it didn't. If you see yourself, write a common phrase, push yourself to be specific and unique with your own language. And again, that goes back to what I was talking about in the beginning, is your voice. Your voice is really important here. You don't need all these cliches to tell your story. Your story can come with words that you actually use that again, like you would talk to your friends when you're really engaged in a story. So you want to use your unique language. Yeah. Thank you, Marilyn. So you're going to work on your script. So you're going to write your story spines, and you're going to work on your script. You're going to try to get it under 5 minutes. That's usually 500 words on the page. If possible, allow for natural gaps, dramatic pauses, audience laughter, that kind of thing. I worked on my script for, I don't know, probably about a week and a half, and then started working on performance and memorizing it. Do we want to talk about performance now? Do we have time to do that, Marilyn?
You can touch on it briefly. We're running a little bit over.
Okay, all right. So, I mean, the performance is different now because you guys are going to be performing for your phones or your devices. So it's not like the lights will be bright and get close to the mic and that kind of thing. Truly, all you want to do is just make sure that you are, this is your story. You're not, the other thing, you can't tell someone else's story. You can't tell your grandmother's story. You can't tell your best friend's story. This needs to be your story. And because it's your story and you know how it goes, you don't have to commit every single word of it to memory. You just want to, write it down, and you want to memorize the story so that you can perform, so that you can really put your energy into your performance. So I worked on memorizing my story. I didn't memorize every single word of it, word for word, because then it sounds reedy and it sounds like you've memorized it word for word, but I memorized the story. I knew my first line, I knew my last line, and then I would just kind of went through the story in my head. Then what happened next? Then what happened next? And I told it. You'll see, or you saw in in my video that I forgot the opening of my story. I came back to it at the end. I was telling them about that sign that I saw, which is a really pivotal moment in my story. That sign that says, give me my guns, my money, and my freedom, you can keep the change. That needed to be said at the beginning, but it wasn't. I didn't say it in the beginning. So I came back and I picked it up at the end, and I think it was fine. I was very, very embarrassed that I forgot that, but because I knew the story so well, I was pretty comfortable to just tell the audience that, okay, I didn't tell you that, here we go. I don't think if I didn't know the story as well, I wouldn't have been as comfortable. So you have your last line down cold, you have your first line down cold, you don't excuse, you don't apologize, you don't justify before your performance begins, you don't do any of that during or afterward. And at the end, you pause, say the last line pause after you say the last line, and then just say thank you or something to show the audience that you're finished. And that's it for performance. Yeah. So are we going to do Q&A now?
Yeah. If anybody has any questions, you just want to put them in the chat. Any questions?
Let's see.
We're so clear. There's no questions.
Isn't that wonderful?
It is wonderful.
I see.
Does it feel limited by a story spine?
Do I ever feel limited by a story spine? I have not. I find them I like order. I like instruction. So I liked having it to start with. I don't know that I referred to my story spine after I wrote the story spine and then I wrote my story. So I don't think I ever went back to the story spine after I wrote my story, but I thought it was very helpful to begin with that spine so that I could write my story and keep it as a story with a beginning, middle, and end and stakes and like everything that it has to have in order to be part of that spine. Do I have suggestions for telling other people's stories? Generally, with storytelling, we don't tell other people's stories. We only tell our own stories, generally. With the moth, which is, of course, the biggest storytelling stage ever, you must tell your own story. You're not allowed to tell other people's stories. It has to be yours. It has to be true. It has to have a beginning, middle, and end. It has to have stakes. Let's see. Can we put the do nots in an email? Yeah, we could do that, right?
I already did.
Oh, she already did. Good. How did you decide on specific stories you decided to tell? That's a good question, and we're going to do an exercise that's going to help you come up with the stories that you want to tell a little bit later on, right? We're going to have time for that?
Oh, yeah, to do the brainstorming.
Yeah. Brainstorming, yeah. Are they?
We might need to not answer all the questions.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry. I want people to be able to share some stories.
Yeah, okay. Do all moth stories have a happy ending? No, they do not. They just have the ending they have. Some of the best ones do not have a bow, or not tied up in a bow, rather. So it has to have an ending, but it doesn't have to be a happy ending. And let's see, how you decided what stories to tell. We're going to do a brainstorming exercise. That's what I did. And I came up with a bunch of story ideas. If you don't remember the exact details of a story, that's okay. You know, that's where you get a little bit of leeway to kind of put things in that probably happened. I actually asked some people, do you remember this? Do you remember what happened here? Do you remember did I get off the plane and go straight to the hospital, or did I go to the hotel first? I couldn't remember. And so, you know, if I didn't have the answer, I probably would have put that I went straight to the hospital just for the story's sake. Do I use the story spine for my podcast? I don't, actually. The podcast has my guest stories on it. I don't actually tell stories on the podcast. They tell their stories to me. Self-doubt when approaching storytelling. Yes. So maybe when we're brainstorming, we'll talk about that. Just kind of overcoming the self-doubt or nervousness or, you know, that kind of thing, because I think everybody has that. Do we want to stop there?
Yeah, maybe. One One person asked about how you start your story. That was a good question. Now I can't find it.
Mike, someone put that in there. That's funny.
Oh, can you talk more about the devices to start the story? I love the the this one moment suggestion.
Yes. Well, so the brainstorming will allow you to pick a subject, and then those are the two devices that we're giving you to start the story. And I'll be able to kind of guide you if you have questions specifically about how to start your Once Upon a Time. But the Once Upon a Time, if you're doing the story spine, you're going to want to say where you're starting your story. Think of a fairy tale. Once upon a time, there was this woman who fell in love with this man, or this woman who couldn't pay her rent, or this woman who was on her way to a protest. So that's your Once Upon a Time. And then, and then what happens? And then what happened? And you can write it through. And it's pretty amazing when you start with your Once Upon a Time, how the story evolves from there once you just start writing it. This one moment, you kind of want to have a story in mind when you write that, because it's hard to write the climax of a story that you don't know what it is yet. But once you have your story in mind, it's easier to get to that climactic moment and start there. For me, the this one moment style is something that I would do after a story spine. After it, because I would generate it that way, and then I would sharpen it with the this one moment style. That's what I would do.
Great. Do we want to maybe take a break?
Sure.
Or do you want to?
I was reading a couple more comments. Let's take a break. And then
5-minute break.
Yeah, maybe a 5-minute break.
5-minute break, and then we'll come back and we will talk about brainstorming, which is exciting.
Great.
Cool. So we'll come back at 6:07.
We'll see you guys at 6:07.
Beautiful.
Okay, should we get started?
Yeah,
Story boot camp.
story boot camp. Storytelling boot camp. Okay, so, sorry, lips are getting a little dry. We are back on, and we're going to talk about brainstorming, which is, you know, it's what, when I took this class, we all sat around with our notebooks and did this in class, and we were able to hear each other's ideas, which was really helpful. But I came up with mine pretty much right away after seeing our instructor's example of his story. I went right to the story that I told after this. So, but a lot of people needed to really do this exercise to come up with a list of stories. So if you're having trouble coming up with an idea, don't panic. Here are some brainstorming exercises that might help you identify something. So the first exercise is you make a list of 3 moments in your life that changed your beliefs in relation to this issue. And it could be, you know, something about the police or someone who mistreated you at work, or it could be any identity issue, honestly. Anything that affects any of your identifiers. If someone challenged that, or you felt bad about it, or you were ashamed, or you felt empowered, anything like that could be something that you would write about. So make a list of 3 moments in your life that that changed one of your beliefs in relation to this issue. And you know, you can think of really big moments, like I said, being hassled by the police, or being mistreated, or dating someone. It could be dating a policeman even. And it could be more minor. It doesn't have to be a huge event, but you could have, if it has to do with any of your identifiers, if it challenged that in any way, that could be something that you write about. So you make a list of 3 and then you pick one of those. Or you can make a list of 3 specific times in your life that you felt like an outsider. You know, for example, mine was, for my first essay for HuffPost, I was the only person of color at this writing retreat. And, you know, or Pam Burrell's, she felt like an outsider because she arrived and was the only Black person in the incoming class. So that moment of discrimination or segregation, oh, here they are. There are your brainstorming exercises. So, so you make a list of 3 specific times in your life that you felt like an outsider, and then you pick one of those. And then that's where you start writing your story spine from that point. So I will give you a few moments to think of things. I know it is hard to think on the spot. If you have some great ideas, if you could put them in the chat, it might inspire other people. That would be great, to just put your time in the chat, just kind of like shouting it out so that people can, that's how I always get my best ideas, is from other people. I rarely come up with anything cold. So if you come up with something, please put it in. And I'll just, you know, I will talk about a couple of times where I felt like an outsider. There was one time I was 10 years old at Paragon Park. And wait, I'm sorry, is this to do, I'm sorry. Oh, is this to do with Black Lives Matter movement, even if we're not Black, or just an outsider moment? Just an outsider moment. Just an outsider moment. And if you are Black, it doesn't have to be connected to the Black Lives Matter movement. But it can be, for sure. You know, we want to be mindful of the times that we're in. So a lot of people of color right now, specifically Black people, are needing to share their stories about what they're feeling right now. And white allies and other people of color. But, you know, your story may not be connected to this at all. The story that you need to tell might have something to do with something that happened to you years ago. Or it may have something that has nothing to do at all with race. So whatever your story is, the one that you need to tell right now, that hopefully will come out of this exercise. Yeah, so I was saying the slumber party. Slumber party, that's a time where you felt like an outsider. That's great. That's absolutely great. Oh yeah, so I was 10 years old at Paragon Park outside of Boston. I grew up in Cambridge, Mass. And my friends and I ran up to the roller coaster because there was no one there and we were riding it over and over again. And the ride operator looked down on us and he said, "It must be watermelon day." And one of the kids, the boys I was with, got so angry he tried to fight him. And I had no idea what he meant by that, but I just knew it was bad. And the rest of my friends, who were also Black, fully understood what he was saying to us, and I just didn't. So I felt like an outsider, and then once I understood what it meant, I was ashamed and felt like an outsider. I was embarrassed that I didn't know what that meant at that time. All right, and beauty pageant, sophomore year of Hugh. Art school killed my creativity. Wow, that's interesting. I love starting a new job. Thank you, Sydney, for that. I appreciate that. High school slumber party for you too. Accidentally said, "Shut up." Mom did not appreciate that. That's great. All right, keep them coming. Keep the brainstorming in the chat. That's great. The only girl heckled is a stand-up comedian to take off her clothes. There are the other females, but you're the only Asian woman. Oh yeah, that's messed up, girl. That's a good one. That's a really good one, actually. So you guys are doing amazing. Amazing. These are such good ideas. Thank you. Primarily white Southern Baptist Church. I'm not quite sure my foundation would match your skin tone. Oh man. Yeah, that's a really good one. White teacher called out my art for not having any meaning when I was using Afrocentric colors. Write that story. Coming out as non-binary, I couldn't decide if I should dress like the guys or the girls for a college dance. That is a dope story. Please tell that story. Oh, the Yellow Ranger, no. Yes, that is a really good story too. You guys are doing great. The art one gave me a lump in my throat too. Yeah, I went to my school counselor my senior year of high school to obtain a transcript for college, and she asked me if I was dropping out of school. Shade, yes. That's good, Danny. Hired as a sports writer when I could barely follow a high school basketball game. Profiled. That's a good one. All right, so pick one of the things you list. Take about 5 minutes to do the 8 points of your story spine. Should we put the story spine back up? That's a good idea, right? So that, yeah, keep brainstorming, but for those of you who have an idea, or I mean, for anybody that doesn't have an idea yet, look at the chat and pick one, get inspired, and then let's start writing your idea down in the story spine so we can move forward with that. Once upon a time, that's your setup. Oh, that's good. I was, who are you in general? Every day I wanted, but one day beginning of pursuit or goal or want or event that made you have the goal or want. Because of that, you want action and a scene. Because of that, action and a scene. Because of that, action and a scene. And then until finally, we figured out if you succeed or failed in getting your goal or what you want. And ever since then, how did the event in the story change you? The because of that can start to feel like they're redundant, but they're not. You really need those three kind of connectors to bring the scene from the beginning to the end. I remember the first time I filled out a story spine, I was like, I only need one because of that. I don't need these three. And when I did it the way it was suggested, it was such a better story. So if you think it's redundant, just push through because you'll be happier with your results. Yeah. I wonder if anybody's writing with a writing utensil on paper anymore. Does everybody write on laptops or on their phones or on iPads? I still write on paper when I'm writing like ideas down. If I'm writing a story, I write on the computer, but paper and pen. Hey, Michelle. My best ideas come out that way. Yeah, mine too. Old school. I think we still got some story ideas coming in. Okay, we got a lot of people going old school with paper and pen. That's so cool. It's not over yet, huh? We haven't completely shifted into a technological world. I think there's something really sacred about writing with the paper and pen too. But like I said, when I sit down to write a story to submit, I write it on my desktop. Pencil is really old school. Yeah, Bonnie, I agree with you. My words go fast too. Wow. We've got some. Okay, let's see. We're going to do until 6:21. Is that right? Is just a couple more minutes? Couple more minutes. I can't wait to hear your stories. I'm so excited. College rule and red Bic. Wow. That's really old school. Thanks, guys. And this is a lot of information you guys are getting right now. Write with a quill. Who writes with a quill? No, that's great. Is that true? You're kidding with me, right? Okay, 30 more seconds. Yeah, so for those of you that are done, I'm just really going to encourage you to watch some storytelling videos over the next few days. Check out the Moth. There are other venues for storytelling, and actually Marilyn's going to talk a little bit more toward the end about pitching your stories around, because there are lots of venues where stories can be told now. But it really helps. It's like, I don't know, anything else. To see other people doing it really increases your ability to participate. All right, so Where are we? Are we at the pitch talk now? We are. All right.
Now we are.
Awesome. So do you want to start, Marilyn?
Yeah, I also was just going to just say, we emailed you a bunch of handouts, or I did, right as the class was starting. Because if any of you don't know how to record yourself, and you don't know how to upload a video to your social media, we wanted you to have the step-by-step instructions. So you'll see this document called recording instructions, and it actually is really easy. You just have to follow it one at a time. And you can record yourself on your computer through QuickTime. I think that's the best way, because then you won't look like a little slit. If you do it on your phone, the video is going to be the size of your phone, which is not terrible, but it's just better if you could do it on your computer.
So why would people want to be recording themselves?
You would want to record yourself because, thank you, Jeff. Because we thought it would be really cool if people would flood the internet with their personal stories. You know, I think it's really moving if people can hear your personal stories, especially in relation to what's going on right now. And if any of you are interested in having your stories disseminated by Writing Pad, there's no pressure, but we would love to help you because we have a big social media following. So I will be emailing you a form if you would, once you're done recording yourself, if you would like to have us share your videos. And so anyway, I hope that makes sense. And also I want to say too that I've learned that when you upload video, it's really great to do it on YouTube or Vimeo, but if you happen to have Facebook or Instagram and you upload that video and the video is 5 minutes or less, Facebook and Instagram, because they're a little bit evil, they will reward you for natively uploading it to their platform. They will show it to more people. So I would recommend that if you can stand it, that you both, and you have a YouTube account and your social media account, that you do both. And what you can do to have us help you, if you want us to help you, is to tag us. And in the form I send you, I'll give you our accounts. But we're at Writing Pad on Facebook and at Writing Pad US on Twitter and Instagram. And then also you can give us your social media accounts and a link to one of your places where you've uploaded it, and we'll also share it for you, but only if you want us to. So anyway, you have this document. It tells you step by step. And Instagram, you have to use IGTV if you do something longer than 2 minutes or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think Twitter is only 2.5 minutes. It's right here, 2.5 minutes. So read at your own pleasure.
Yes.
Okay, and then I just quickly also wanted to just tell you about, there are a lot of storytelling shows and podcasts that are interested in your stories. And I just have to find this document. So I can show you, and I also emailed this to you. But you know, if you have a story about feeling like an outsider, or if you've experienced discrimination, I mean, those kinds of high stakes stories are the kinds of stories that get on podcasts and that win them off, because they have high stakes and they're moving. I mean, you saw Pam Burrell's story.
Mm-hmm.
I cried a second time.
Me too.
For good, we were both crying.
We're both crying for both stories. Laura's story and
yeah,
Pam's
Laura's
story.
stories too. So I encourage you to not only record yourself for your own social media, and if you want us to share it, to have us help you share it, but to also submit it somewhere. And I'm going to show you a little document to help you figure out how to do that. But there are a lot of podcasts that are interested in radio stories. I just was looking this up today for all of you, and Roxanne Gay's podcast, Here to Slay, actually is looking for Black Lives Matter stories now. So there is their link. Snap Judgment also likes those kinds of stories. They tend to like a longer format. We've gotten some folks on All Things Considered, and they pay. Also in LA, Unfictional is a local NPR show that is really great for stories. And I gave you the producer's email address because he was a writing pad teacher.
But they don't have to have
And they
LA
don't-
story necessarily.
Yeah, it wouldn't have to be an LA story. He just loves stories and publishes really great stories. Also, the Moth has, so if you go and compete at the Moth, like what Laura was talking about, you may get picked, and if you win the Story Slam or you're the second runner up, they will put your story on the NPR show. But there's
Moth
also
Radio Hour.
Moth Radio Hour.
Which is the Moth radio show.
Yeah, but if you go on this link, there is the thing called the Moth Main Stage, which is a paid show that travels around the US, and their next one is going to be virtual. And you should pitch them your story. One of our students pitched her story about how she surprisingly found out that her ancestors, her recent ancestors, were slaves in the South, and she's been paid to tell it, I want to say at like 8 moths or something like that, all over the country. So you should.
And this is a show that normally like they have like celebrity storytellers. Like it's a big deal.
It's a big
really
deal.
Big deal. So,
But don't let that stop you, because
yeah, she'd never competed in the Moth, right? She just submitted her story, and so it's
and then we just gave you some local shows that you can submit to, so you can go on their website and just see what their submission guidelines are. And I don't want to take up too much more time, but the process for pitching your story is very similar to pitching an essay.
which a lot of these people probably haven't done, so we can.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm looking for the document. I'm not very good at share screen. All right, here it is. I emailed you this too. So really what you want to do is, you know, these podcasts, they're journalistic organizations. So you just want to be professional when you pitch your story out. If you have a silly email address, don't use that. Make a plain one that's just your name at gmail.com. If you have like a sexy signature with a picture, take it out. You just want to be like very plain and professional, because these editors don't know who you are and you're competing with professional journalists, but you will be a professional journalist once you sell your story. So just act like you already are one. That's what we do in LA.
And you don't want to have like Howdy Doody 27.
Yeah, not Howdy Doody 27. Don't joke around with the editor. They don't know who you are. Just keep it simple. Okay, editorial contact info. You can find it through Google. We gave you some links. I gave you one editor's email address. Don't wear it out. Do a short
producer.
Producer.
For the radio shows.
Yes. Anyway, when you pitch, it should be a short email. It should be brief and compelling. Remember, these people don't know who you are. They may have storytellers, journalists that they work with regularly, but if you have a pitch letter that has a compelling subject line and it says pitch : I was beaten by the police. I just was trying to think of something that would get an editor to open the email. You know, think of something short that would get someone to open the email, and you'll see one of my very embarrassing pitches that got the editor to open the email.
Can I jump in and just say something quickly?
Yeah.
So typically with these shows, what will happen is that an editor will have one story, and then a producer will have one story, and then they will build an entire show around that theme. Mm-hmm. So really what they're looking for is other stories that can relate thematically to this one story, but are completely different. So
that happened with you because Jeff got onto Bob Carlson's Unfictional.
Yeah, and then I ruined my relationship with my
his brother.
But it's okay.
But it's okay now.
Right. It's fine.
It was totally worth it. Anyway, I think it's worth it to get your story on the radio. Don't worry about that. So anyway, I don't want to take up too much time. Anyway, you want to make your, see, I'm doing all the words that are on the list. I'm sorry, Laura.
So.
All the don'ts?
That happened.
That happened. Don't do that in your pitch letter. You want to
mic drop and we're okay.
I like that. That was on the handout. Anyway, you want your pitch letter to be super short. This is one of my classmates in an essay class. I mean, it's the same thing when you're pitching your story. So Angelina Jolie had just come out with this op-ed in the New York Times about how she had a preemptive double mastectomy because her mother died of breast cancer, and
she tested positive for the
positive for the BRCA gene. And so this classmate of mine wrote an op-ed in response to that. And it was so compelling because it was in the news. Having a news hook actually is a great thing. And that's why we're doing this class. Because, you know, if you write something that's related to racism or feeling like an outsider or the police, you have unfortunately a news hook. You have a story that is hot. So
unfortunately or fortunately? I
said unfortunately. Fortunately for your publishing, but unfortunately that it's happening.
Yes.
So anyway, you should use that in your pitch. And that's what she did here. And look at how short it is. And she got published within 2 days. She got published before our class was over. And then in terms of following up, you want to think about treating the producer or the editor just like somebody you would like to woo romantically. You don't want to seem like a crazy stalker. You don't want to send them long scrolling emails. You don't want to email them like constantly and be like, why haven't you answered me? Just be professional, hold on to yourself, have your freak out at home, not in your correspondence with them. I mean, I know it's really personal, but if you can keep it to yourself, it'll all go really well. Because we all feel that way. We're like, oh my God, did they hate me? They didn't answer. And if they don't answer, it's not personal. It's because they're probably super busy. They may not have seen your email. So if you got something that's hot, that's related to what's going on right now, and I'm not trying to diminish it by calling it hot, it's kind of like a journalistic term. What you want to do is just send your initial pitch, wait 3 days, and then do this please confirm receipt thing. So you're going to resend you're going to reply all to your email, and you'll add in please confirm receipt. And I've gotten an email back from a lot of editors just from that. And then I add in this line saying, I really wrote this story with your publication in mind, but if you're not interested, I'll send it elsewhere. I'll wait till tomorrow just in case you've been out of the office or have had a last minute change of heart. So you're not getting mad. You're not like, why didn't you answer me?
You're like, I'm really into you, but I mean, there are 20 other people who want to go out with me right now, and they're all really cool. But you know, it's like no pressure. So.
Yep. And then.
And also just know, like, these guys, they need your stories. Like, actually, their job depends on their ability to get great stories consistently. So they really do need you. So it's good to keep in mind.
Yes.
Yes.
Indeed. Okay, so then the last thing I wanted to show you was an example of a pitch letter, and you're going to learn way too much about me, but that's okay.
Are they going to
actually, they're going to learn about you, because
man.
This first thing that I got published was about something that happened to Jeff that I stole.
How embarrassing.
But I told my version of it. So anyway, sometimes doing something a little salacious gets the attention. So that's what,
Especially if it's salon.
yeah, well, Salon liked that at the time. So you can see here, I have a subject line that got the editor to open the email. I mean, it wasn't like she thought she was getting an ad for Viagra. She got an actual pitch for something. And it also distinguished that I wasn't a publicist trying to pitch her on my product. I'm like, I have an essay. So I summed it up in the same way that we sent you in the pre-homework. My story is about this, but it's really about this. So I wrote an essay about how a cherished couple's friend asked my husband to masturbate with him. It's a story of a couple hemorrhaging friends and what we did to make it stop. But it's really about how we strengthen our own relationship while struggling with the fear of being left behind. And actually, and then I said what section I thought it was appropriate for. I don't know that podcasts, I don't think they have sections, but you know, if you want to say I'm pitching this for the Moth main stage, you know,
if you have insight into a particular episode that they're doing, so if they're doing something about like betrayal, and you have a betrayal story, you could say like, I know that you guys are working on this betrayal episode. I think it would be perfect for it. Here's
yeah, sometimes they put out specific calls for submissions, like Roxanne Gay's podcast just put out a call for stories about Black Lives Matter. So you could mention that. And then I just gave you an example of a pitch that is a little bit longer because I added in some statistics. So if you think you want to do a little research on whatever it is you're writing about, and you think it'll make a more compelling case for the person to take your story, you should include that. So I think I've talked quite a long time. I'm so sorry, Laura.
I know, it's great.
Oh, wait, you didn't cover those little bits from This American Life.
No, it's okay. We're good. We're good.
It's super fast. You should just share it. I think that's cool.
Right.
Sorry,
you guys have to see the married couple each other. It's totally embarrassing. All right. Well, Jeff and I took a class with Elna Baker, who is a producer at This American Life, and this is what
and the Story Scout for This American Life.
And a Story Scout, yeah. And this is what she said to put in a radio storytelling pitch.
Particularly if you're pitching to This American Life, but actually if you look at it, it's really appropriate for anything because it's all good stuff.
So you want to introduce yourself. I mean, I think I did that in my letter. If you have credits, pick your top 4. What I usually do, this is good. So I didn't have any credits the first time I pitched a story, so I just didn't mention it. But I included my story as an attachment. So if you have your story as a Word document, you can attach it and you can paste it in the body of the email. If you have a MP3 of your story or whatever the appropriate file thing is now, I think it's MP3, you want to attach it. And I actually gave you in the handouts, there's a link to the NPR's required file format. So you can click and see what they want if you want to pitch All Things Considered.
And also just know that like when we say credits don't necessarily mean like you worked at this radio station. It might mean just that you have the proper credentials to tell that story. So for instance, if your story is about like a dog sledding retreat in Alaska and you have the story because you actually worked on this dog sledding retreat, that's a great credential. That's what you need. And the fact that you have access to other people on this retreat that they can interview and can be woven into the tableau of the story, like that's great.
Yeah. So but if you do actually have other stories that you've like published, you could put them in the PS below, just like what I did in my pitch letters, and you have my pitch letters. And then you say, this is the story of, and you can, and if you're going to do interviews and you're going to expand your story, you say, I can interview these people, because you're trying to sell them on doing it. And then you can say, listen to it here, or for a full transcript, click here. Okay. And then the other thing she said was stories must be unique with surprising plot turns that connect you with a universal theme.
So you want to have that in the actual pitch, you know, or at least hint at it, and then at least have that in the transcript or the actual, the recorded version.
So I hope that was helpful. I know this is like a kamikaze.
Yeah.
Does anybody, we'll share the socials, I promise. Did I confuse anybody with our long, garbled, half fighting pitch talk?
I think we got to move on.
Okay, let's move on. Okay, good. All right, I'm just going to do some really quick announcements, and then Laura is going to take, oh good, thank you. I'm glad that people haven't fallen asleep. And then Laura's going to take your story ideas, which is really...
And turn them into like a full-fledged story, or at least the beginning of the
Well, tell you what to put in it so
Yeah.
you can
you
can go home and write it and not hurt yourself.
The magic is going to happen before your eyes. It's going to be so much fun.
It's going to be very, very magical. So really quickly, we just wanted to say that we're very excited that all of you are in this class. And if you would like to continue with us, we would love to help you. You know, we really want you to finish crafting your stories and record them regardless of whether or not you take a class here. We support you and we want your stories to get out there. But if you want...
oh, and also, can I just say something
yes.
on that? And so if you guys have any questions about that, just shoot us an email at hello@writingpad.com. and we'll try to help you out.
Yep.
So we are fully behind this. We want to help you get these stories out, and we'll do whatever it takes. So hit us up if you need help.
Yes.
There's no excuse for, you know, not getting your story out there.
Yes, and it's totally safe because you're at home recording yourself and you don't need to put on a mask. So anyway, I wish that we didn't have this situation, but at least you got that. So, and people are super bored, so they need to hear your stories anyway, right? Because
Totally.
they need to be entertained. So I just put some coupons in the chat. They'll make things a little bit cheaper if you can afford them. It's Bunker 65 or Bunker 65 plan for $65 off a long class, and Bunker 30 for $30 off a short class. Now, I think what's going to make your story really amazing, if you can afford it, is to take Laura's Storytelling 102, where you will actually get to workshop it in depth. And she'll give you lots of great notes, and she'll also help give you performance tips.
Yep.
So that one is going to be next Saturday, June 20th at 2:30 online. So check that out. Also, we did an op-ed class on Tuesday, and opinion pieces in newspapers are a thing. You can get paid for them. It's also a great way to get your perspective on what's going on out there. I think it's really, really important. So we actually posted the class, recording of the class on our YouTube. And if you would like to watch that and you want to get feedback on your op-ed, Erin Aubrey Kaplan, who is a columnist at the New York Times, is doing 2 of these little workshopping classes where she gives you feedback. And that is taking place this Sunday at 2 to 5 Pacific Standard online, and Wednesday, June 17th. And what I want to say too, with Laura's class and with Erin's class, if you do not get selected to pitch your story in the class, they will give you feedback over email, so you have some guidance before you actually sit down to write it. Because we really want you to be successful.
Yeah, the idea is that obviously you're attending the class. If somebody hasn't, they can watch the class. They can actually write their first draft of it, and then we'll get it workshopped in class, right?
Yeah. And also just know too, you can check out the nonfiction section of our site. We've helped 159 students sell essays and articles. Laura is definitely one of those people. I am one of those people too, because I take the classes. We've helped 14 people get into the New York Times. I am one of those people because I take the classes over and over. They work.
You got in twice, right?
I got in twice last year. It's fun, and you make your money back when you get published. So anyway, you should check us out. We've helped a lot of people win Moth Slams as well. I want to say it's 17 people. We have some storytelling classes with the SF Moth host, so you can check it out. I don't want to take up a lot of time.
3 Grand Slams.
3 Grand Slams. It's just fun.
Yeah.
Telling stories, trying to get published. So now, speaking of having that fun, I'm going to cede the reins to the fabulous Laura. And what we want you guys to do is just put your story pitch in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many people as possible. And we're going to be timing. So just pitch your story in the chat. Say, my story is about blah, but it's really about blah.
And then we'll try to figure it out.
We'll try to figure it out. So
my story is about blank, but it's really about blank. I also just want to reiterate while you're doing that, how important it is to, first of all, that list that Marilyn and Jeff just gave us is incredible. Use that list. It's a resource that not a lot of people have. I will be stealing it after this for sure. And just to listen to and watch the Moth, listen to those podcasts. I would do it before I pitch them. I would be really familiar with the show so that I could include that in my pitch. You know, I love the one with so-and-so. Here's my idea. You know, thank you for whatever. And it's just really, it's flattering when to the producer or the editor when you know what they're doing. If you're pitching blind, it just doesn't feel, I don't know, you know what I mean. It's not the same. It is more professional to have researched and watched and be familiar with it. I think it's respectful too, to have done that. So let's see. Lily wants to know, is all of this open if you're not in the US? Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, the classes are live, but a lot of them are you talking about the classes or the
Time zone or what?
I mean, the classes are live. You have to check and see if the time zone is favorable to you. I mean, everything's
right.
But if you're asking about submitting to podcasts, you can totally submit to any of them.
Story, they'll take it. It doesn't matter where you are.
I mean, Moth Main Stage is usually done in person.
But not right now.
But not right now.
Yeah. And Moth themes, for June, it's stories of gravity and resistance. And then in July, they're going to be doing a theme of cohabitation. So other themes include fish out of water, the tipping point, fear, off the rails, the extra mile. There's so many different themes. And then, you know, Marilyn talked about all the places that you can pitch besides the Moth. But so let's see.
Their story.
Where are my story pitches? Okay, Camillo. My story is about growing up multi-ethnic, but it's really about trying to raise a kid to be less confused about race than me.
Okay, here, I'm gonna ask Camillo to turn on the microphone. I'm trying to get Camillo.
And just ask to start video. Yeah.
Yeah, you got it, Camilo.
Camillo,
There you are.
can you
We can see them.
your video?
We see you.
Oh, you want me to say the video? Oh, I have to turn on the lights. I like to listen to classes in the dark.
You can light a candle.
Oops, sorry. Can you do that again?
Oh,
You just want to start your video.
Yeah,
Okay.
you have to enable him.
so, I'm so sorry.
Video. All right.
There we
Quarantine.
go.
Yeah.
Hi,
Okay.
Camilo.
Hey.
Hello.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you guys. So yeah, my story is that's something I wanted to tackle.
Okay. Could you elaborate a little bit?
So it's about like my personal experience or just the story?
Just like what the story is.
So the story is about constantly, the story is about growing up and always having to identify your racial background, and how I've come to be comfortable with that over the years and growing up, and using that for a force of power and telling stories for myself.
Mm. And then you're
And
raising.
then, I'm sorry.
Then you're raising.
So I have a young child, and I'm trying to establish that without, while also letting him have his own natural reactions to how he deals with that in a world that's now a lot more stressful in terms of what you are and where you're from.
So I think for that story, you would need to give me something more specific, like a time where you used your racial ambiguity to your advantage, or you felt empowered by it, and then showed me where it might be a challenge with raising a kid to find their own identity. Okay. Or to be empowered by their identity. Is because I think that's what I heard you saying. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I would ask you to get to something specific that happened where you felt empowered by your own ambiguity or your own multiculturalism, and it was to your advantage and you were empowered by it. And then I almost said cut to, we're not allowed to say that. But then you want to talk about how then raising a child who is also multicultural and what that means in today's world and how you empower them in that. But you want to show it with a story. So my kid went to school and he came back and they're doing, family trees or they're talking about ancestry and he doesn't know, or she doesn't know, or my child just doesn't know what to put. Or my child got made fun of because he put the wrong thing or she put the wrong thing down or put a blank down when asked about ancestry. So then I was confronted with, how do I educate my child about who they are? Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the specific.
Yeah, because what we want to see is, it certainly doesn't have to be a problem that you're multicultural. It's a thing to be celebrated, but the story needs to have stakes. So what's at stake here, right? You're multicultural. There's no stakes there, but what's at stake about that? And what's at stake when you have to raise a child in a multicultural world? What are the stakes? What are you afraid of losing? What are you afraid of happening to them or for yourself? What makes you uncomfortable about that? Or what makes other people uncomfortable about it?
Okay. Yeah, that definitely gets the gears going.
Okay. And then remember a beginning and a middle and an end. So the once upon a time is, I'm this multicultural man who lived in the world, moving about freely and enjoying, my whatever. And then what's the next thing in the story spine? I forgot. But whatever the next thing is, I think it's every day. Every day, I moved about, able to assimilate into any group and code switch with everybody. And because of that, this happened. And because of that, until finally, I have this kid and I need to be able to tell them what's going on. So, yeah.
Then just a thought.
Yeah.
Just feeding off of what you already said is like, it feels like just even starting with the scene, like you were saying of, like we're in, parent teacher conference, or like we're in like a Gymboree and this thing happens. And so that's sort of the inciting incident.
Yeah.
That brings us back to understand kind of how you are dealing, like what this means to you personally. And so that we can try to like unpack what this whole thing means with the child, because it's really coming down to like your experience and what it meant to you, like you growing up, and we get to know you, and then we start, then the real story is kind of how you tackle the problem of figuring this out with your kid in the present day. Does that make sense?
You're muted.
Camilla, you're muted.
Do you want to unmute yourself? Do
Can
we
we-
have to unmute
do we
you?
have to unmute?
Sorry. We're not used to doing these very large classes.
Okay. No, I muted it because I didn't want it background noise. Okay, that gives me an idea, because one of the inciting incidents was a kid at school told him that Black people are the color of poop. And I remember I was trying to deal with that with him in a way that didn't, I guess in a way that didn't make him angry or hateful, but
Wow.
that helped him be able to deal with that.
That's
I
awesome.
think the biggest thing is having to march one way, being comfortable in your multiculturalness and not having to necessarily choose sides. You know what I mean?
Yes.
That's kind of like where I was going with that.
Yeah.
That's a story.
It is a story, and that's a
Heavy,
great
right?
incident. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's cool. But that's what you guys mean. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I can't wait to hear it.
Shocking.
Shocking.
Ella, I was going to take Ella's pitch next. Ella, I think I managed to unmute you.
I see Ella here. Oh, yes. Black art being critiqued by the white professor. Please tell us, Ella, what happened?
So I was in college, and it was a printmaking class. And at that time, I was kind of obsessed with making art that had anything to do with Blackness. So I made this piece that was 3 people coming out of the continent of Africa, and in the background was these colors, a gradient of the colors red, green, and yellow. And so at the end of each class, when we were supposed to bring in projects and then we would make them, and then at the end of the class, there was a critique of all the pieces. And the professor looked at mine and was like, "This doesn't make sense. I don't understand why you use these colors. It doesn't seem to go." And I was kind of like taken aback for a second, because I know what they mean, obviously, and it was very intentional, the way that I use them. But before I even had a chance to recover, a white student in the class was like, "I don't understand how you don't understand what it means. It's very clear, like these are Afrocentric colors, and that's why she used them." And that was also shocking to me, because I didn't think that anybody would stick up for me or say anything at all. I was the only Black student in the class. And it just made me realize that there's space for white folks to be co-conspirators with me, that I don't have to always explain things. And that also, like, I should never be ashamed for my own art and how I express myself, even if it's being critiqued.
Yeah. I love that. I love the lessons at the end that you got from it. And I think that, can you tell me what's at stake in that story?
I think my own sense of self-worth, I think, was at stake, and also being shamed in front of a whole classroom of my peers, who I will see again. It's not like it was something public where I'll never see these people again. Like, I have class with them, they're my classmates, we had shows together. Yeah. So I think at stake is that, besides my self-confidence, also being shamed, and then also these other students thinking the same thing as the professor, that the colors that I find were really intentional and meant something very personal to me didn't mean anything at all, that message was going to be relayed to them.
Yeah, I mean, I picture it going with the same beats of Pam Burrell's story, where she comes in and she, kind of confesses that she didn't have self-confidence, that, other people were able to make her opinion or voice their opinions on her behalf. And then how she moves through this and becomes empowered, and, her with the 30 prisoners that she would go and visit, and you become empowered with yourself, but also with this white ally in your class.
Yeah.
I think it could be a really cool journey. I like it a lot.
Thanks.
Yeah. Please write it and record it and then send it in and put it out there so that we can all hear it.
Thank you.
Did you have any more questions?
I guess my only question would be the ending about how to make it land. If having these two things, when you walk away with because of that, is it okay to have more than one thing, more than one, sort of like aha moment at the end? Because I think it was those two things. The fact that there is space for white folks to be allies, to be co-conspirators, but also like I learned something about myself, that there's no reason for me to be ashamed of the work that I make, and sort of like my own pride.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the until finally could almost be where you found your white co-conspirator. And then ever since then, you found yourself as a result. Like, you don't have to be ashamed.
Right.
But her coming in, because of that can all be, your feelings of shame and not knowing whether or not you were valued for using those colors by the teacher who's supposed to be keeping an open and inclusive space for everybody. And then, that moment where the audience is scared that you won't have an ally.
Mm-hmm.
And then she comes in and is your ally, and then until finally, right? Then we can all put our shoulders down because she was great, but now you know who you are.
Right.
And you can go on. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's great.
Okay, I was going to take Valerie next.
Hi. Hello.
Hey, Valerie.
Hi. Can you hear me? I hope so.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So my story is kind of, I don't want to say it's hard. It's just really awkward. I'm the only Black woman living in a small Canadian town. I'm married to a white man, and my son is biracial, but he appears to be white. Like, if you saw him, you'd have to really look and notice his, his lips, his nose, the telltale details of being Black.
Mm-hmm.
He came home from preschool and he told me he didn't want to be Black.
Mm.
And as a parent of a biracial child, I want him to be proud of being biracial. However, I also want him to be proud of being Black and white. But I'm raising a white man. And it dawned on me recently. He's now in grade 1, but now that he's in grade 1, it's made me realize I'm raising a child that has no concept of my experience. And I'm afraid to damage that for him. I don't want him to feel like he can't be his own person, but I want him to be proud. It's complicated.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is, but I think it's just more layered than complicated. There are all these different layers to the story. And it's unusual. It's not typical that you typically biracial children that are mixed with Black tend to look Blacker, right? They're more identifiable as Black.
Right.
So what do you think is at stake here?
Sometimes I think what's at stake is my relationship with my husband, because I get mad that he doesn't necessarily understand what it's like to be Black. But then I'm like, well, why would he? He's white.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I think what's at stake is my reactions to like the current political environment.
Mm-hmm.
Might make my son feel very uncomfortable, because he's already said, well, I don't want to be Black, but he was 3 when he said it. Now he's 6.
Mm-hmm.
It's and I agree with you. It's multi-layered. It's not complicated. It's very multi-layered. And I don't want him hating himself. I don't hate white people. Obviously, it's. I'm still trying to figure it out as I try to explain it to you.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely try it because it is multi-layered. You want to be, as specific as possible.
Mhm.
So you would want to find that inciting incident, to start the story with.
The preschool incident,
The
coming
preschool
home.
incident, yeah. And
Yeah.
saying, "Mommy, I don't want to be Black." And then you'll look at, every day I try not to mention, or try not to make him feel bad for not wanting to be Black or whatever it might be.
Right, yeah.
And then because of that,
Mhm.
I feel more alone with my race in my house than ever before. Because of
Mhm.
that, or because of that, and I'm just putting words out there. They certainly don't have to be yours.
No, I know. Yeah. Some of that's true, though. I mean, you're
Yeah.
kind of spot on. Mhm.
And then until finally, and that's probably what you'll want to hone everything down to is where you
Mhm.
are with it. Because what we want to see is a shift, right? Because I think you're afraid when he comes home and says he doesn't want to be Black because you don't know what that's going to mean for him, right? Or for your family.
Mhm.
And then, in the times that we're in right now, it's a really scary place to be divided,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I live in Canada, so I'm a little bit grateful for that. But
Yes. But just the times that we're in.
But the times that, yeah, and
Yeah.
it's very similar, it's not as divisive, but we do have our problems here in Canada.
Sure.
And
sure.
I grew up in America, so yeah.
Yeah. So I would really concentrate, since you have your inciting incident, I would concentrate on that until finally. So where's the shift and where am I going with this? And then ever since then, I've been able to let him be himself while I pursue my own identity and embrace my own Blackness, in a house where I'm the only Black person, or in a town where I'm the only, whatever it is.
It's both.
Yeah. Both. That's a lot. So, but I would try to really convey what that feels like, how isolating that could be, without asking for sympathy. But just
because I don't feel sorry for myself.
Yeah.
I chose to live here.
But it is different. It's anything that is othering is just different. It's a different experience, and people aren't really hip to it unless they have to notice.
Sure.
Oh, there he is.
I appreciate it's
so
bedtime here.
He's adorable.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate knowing where to go with it. Like it's the shift. It's the shift, and it's okay if it's multi-layered.
Absolutely.
Don't do that with your mouth. Are you silly? Go. Your father's calling you. No bubbles. Oh, Bilky, don't step on my leg. Okay. Good night. I'll be right there. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know how to take the video off.
Yeah. He'll help you. Can you help her with the video, Marilyn?
Or do I push a button on my end?
Yeah, there's a little camcorder icon probably in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen.
Okay. Oh, there it is. Yep.
And
there
then
it is. Okay.
There's a little old-timey microphone in the bottom left-hand corner.
Okay.
But that was
Thank
so
you.
adorable to see the culprit behind the story.
It really was perfect timing.
Very cute culprit. Anyway, Tiara, I was going to have you go next. I'm trying to unmute you. And
I'm here. Can you hear me?
yes, and can you start your video?
Okay.
Great. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay, so my story is about me being a 15-year-old Black girl in the New Orleans Superdome during Hurricane Katrina. But my real story is about us being, as a community, Black community, being trapped in where we are, and how we find ourselves in these bubbles and we're revolving and we're staying right there where we've always been instead of becoming better than who we are.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the inciting incident as the going to the, did you say the Superdome?
Yes.
Yeah, going to the Superdome during Katrina, what that looked like and what that felt like. How old were you then?
15.
15.
Mm-hmm.
So having to, whatever you grabbed to go there, you know, to pack, what it sounded like, what it felt like, what the energy was like, and arriving there and being there, and that can absolutely be your inciting incident. And I love that the real story is the trap, right?
Right, right.
That, you know, for anyone who didn't live in New Orleans, then we all watched it unfold on
Right.
television, and still see, not just in New Orleans, but around the country especially. But there was a complete lack of resources and respect for the lives that were,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
so I would tell the story of, I would start with going to the Superdome for sure. And then maybe this is, what's the other one called? This moment. Is it called This Moment, Marilyn?
It's called This One Moment.
This One Moment, thank you. I think that would be a good format for this story, because
Okay.
it could be this one moment where you're packing to go there, you know, or whatever you did to prepare to go there. You could start there, so we're all nervous about you actually going to the Superdome, and then you could go back and kind of tell the story of the challenges that the Black community faces that brought you to this point. And then we could end with you arriving there and whatever you experienced while you were there. And do you think you experienced a shift? Because I understand what was at stake, but did you experience a shift?
I definitely did.
Yeah.
It was moments in the Superdome that definitely made me who I am today. That made me think that I can't be here. It was a situation in the Superdome where I'm walking with my grandfather. At this point, there's no food, there's no water, everything's cut off, it's hot, and you're just miserable. But you're like, I'm gonna keep pushing, and then we're walking, and they kept us outside for so long before going in. And they were checking for weapons and guns and things like that. So you think you're kind of safe. But when I turn my head and I'm walking, and then I fall, and it's because, and everyone's looking at me, and I'm thinking, what's going on? What's going on behind me? To be more brief about the situation, what's going on behind me is this guy. He's lost his mind, complete mind. And I reference him as the hook man, and he's swinging this hook, and he like almost gets me while he's swinging this hook. And that's the moment where, when my grandfather picks me up and tries to console me, it completely changes me. It's like, I can't be here anymore. I cannot live life like this. And I don't want people to have to get to a situation where they're faced with someone swinging a hook, for lack of better words, in their face, and telling them that you've got to change. You've got to make that change before you get to that breaking point.
Yeah.
So I definitely had a turning point.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a fantastic story. It really is.
Thank you.
It sounds like it's probably 10 or 12 stories in there that could be
Well,
told.
I actually wrote a book.
Yeah.
I wrote a book. It's published a book, but now I want to do more of the short talking, giving reason why behind some of the stories that happened while I was in the Superdome.
Yeah. I would say to watch Pam Burrell's story a couple more times.
Okay.
And just take note of the beats in her story, how she sets it up, how she takes you through, because she really takes you through her history beautifully without staying on any one point for too long. She you move through very easily with her. And I think your story is really powerful, and it could have a really important impact on people. It could be a really great storytelling story. So,
awesome.
Yeah, so try that format. That format we mailed out to people as well, right, Marilyn? So you should have that in your email. Start with that. If that doesn't work for you, do the story spine.
Okay.
And then write it out and, you know, see if you can condense it to a 500 word story, 5 minutes. And just keep the really important elements in there. Don't take those important elements out, but just, you know, try to condense it, because that'll be how it's most powerful, you know, if
Okay.
it's told concisely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Amazing.
Awesome. Thank
I'll
you. I
read that
appreciate
book
it.
too.
I will put the name of it in the
Yeah.
comments.
Yeah. Great.
All right. Thank
Thank you.
you.
I was gonna have Sid go next. Let's see.
Hi, Marilyn.
Hi, can I would you be willing to share your video?
Yes.
Great.
I'm so sorry, everyone. It's really light behind me. I can try and move my chair.
Yeah, maybe try to move it like in the, there you go.
Yes.
Well, we do want to see you. And
Yeah. She's coming. You look like a specter before.
Hello. I'm real.
You're real.
Okay. So my story is about being a substitute teacher in parts of East Los Angeles, where I walk into the school and I know that I'm being judged for what I look like, for being brown, racially ambiguous, and am I bilingual? Can I speak English and Spanish? Yes, I can. But am I authentic enough for the people, the faculty, the students, the administrative staff? And there's one student who is like, that's the setup, I'm already uncomfortable. And there's one student out of 36 who is the disruptive student. She is violent, she's throwing chairs, she's kicking people, and I have no choice but to do the ultimate step, which is to call the principal. And the principal says, well, who is she? Can you describe her? Because the student refuses to give her name. And the first thing I say is she's African American. And the student completely shuts down emotionally and then establishes the story she's going to tell the principal. And I realized that if the story is considered true and valid, my career is on the line. I could lose my credential. I obviously will not be asked back to the school. I can get fired from the agency that places me there. And that's what's at stake, but I don't know how to set it up because I explained to the student that I am African American, and then she gets even angrier. And she's very young. She's maybe 10 or 11 years old. And I see how marginalized she feels and how the other students are subtly making fun of her because they're lighter skinned and they're Chicana, they're Latinx, they're Hispanic. And I realize that that's a whole world I have never experienced. It's a whole nother level. It's the palimpsest of racial ambiguity and racial belonging is so deep and so entrenched and so painful and so subtle at the same time.
Yeah. So you kind of go in feeling like you're the fish out of water, but then you end up dealing with the girl who really is, right? And she is acting out on that and challenging you and your authority, and putting your career and probably your pride in danger, right? Because you want to come in and you want to be respected by your students. You have to be in order to teach. You know, you can't come in and be somebody that they don't respect, or else you won't get your point across. And I'm not talking about feared. I'm just talking about respected. So for her to challenge that means that you might not be successful, and it could put your career in jeopardy. So that's at stake. The stakes are really clear there. I'm not as clear about your shift. Is your shift that you see her as you understand her pain and why she's doing this? And if so, how does that take place in the story? Like, how do we know?
In real life, it was never resolved because I never had an opportunity to speak with her and share with her one-on-one, or to ask her to step outside of the classroom with me and let her know what she was really afraid of, or have her let me know what she was really afraid of. And I think the shift for me is within the story, just being able to share with the administration at the school that they may not be aware of how they're creating this environment. And I did get that across to the administration.
So you kind of advocated for her?
I advocated for her, and I advocated for just like a cultural neutrality, which fundamentally doesn't exist in Los Angeles when you're in charter and public schools and you're teaching.
Yeah. I think that's great. I think that's a great shift. You're going to say something else?
I'm just thinking about how to share that with that moment sitting in the principal's office, feeling like I was the bad guy. And I did feel like the bad guy.
Yeah.
I was completely ostracized and made to feel like I was a monster.
So what do you think your once upon a time would be? The beginning, the inciting incident.
I think my once upon a time would be wanting to just be the superhero teacher and thinking, you know, I'm ethnic and you're ethnic, and let's all just move forward with the class lessons and have a good day, have a good week, have a good month of me being your substitute teacher.
Yeah. So you kind of came in full of optimism for being able to do this because you're all like in the same boat. And then you come in and find out that you're not, right? And there's one particular student who calls you out on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's good. I think it's really good. I think you'll just want to, you know, I would put it in the story spine. We'll call it the story spine wash, put it through that wash. And then just, you know, to keep kind of, you know, as specific as you can. And, you know, that 5-minute timeline is just a really good way to make sure you're not going on for too long about any one thing, that you really make sure that everything gets equal attention. But I think people would be on that journey with you. And I think I could totally picture that girl. I can picture like what her hair looked like, what her expressions were like. I could picture what she was doing body language wise. And I could see you, especially, you know, with a visual of you. But, you know, even if you're on a podcast where they can't see you, you can describe the juxtaposition between you and what you look like. And I would definitely do that. Describe yourself for the listener so that you can really have that juxtaposition will be something that will just help it be a better vehicle for the story. People will understand why you were scared, and then be, you know, rooting for you to have the shift that you're talking about at the end, where you can advocate for somebody, even if you don't ever connect with her again. You can still advocate for the space that she's in, which is what it sounded like you did.
Yeah. Wow.
And then
thank you.
Miko is saying, I also heard going from being mostly afraid for herself and her own job to having compassion. Yeah. And how scared and pissed off the little girl was. Yeah.
Precisely. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
And how Sid would never have had to deal with that little girl. You don't have to deal with what she has to deal with, right? Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thank you, Kimiko.
Thank you, Kimiko, for sharing. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome, Sid. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Marilyn and Jeff. Good to see you.
You too. So I was going to have, I hope I don't mispronounce your name, but I probably will. Lanika go next?
Lanika.
Lanika, I'm sorry.
Lanika. It's okay. I get that often.
What a great smile you have, Lanika.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for this class. So my story is about how a friend of mine challenged her non-Black people of color friends and followers on her Instagram, on who weren't talking about the current events involving the deaths of the Black people because of police brutality. Specifically, it was during the time when Ahmaud Arbery's story just broken out. But it's really about how I personally learned how action is vitally important in being an ally. Yeah.
Great. Can you tell me how you learned that? Like what action you took?
Yeah, of course. So we had a conversation. I had messaged her back because, you know, if the shoe fits, you know, I'm going to reply and it fits. So I was like, hey, you know, this is how I feel about the situation. It's not that I don't care about the Black community, and it's not that I feel desensitized to the news. It's simply that I feel like my platform is so small, and me hashtagging another name isn't going to help anyone, isn't going to help. Who's it going to help? You know, social media activism seems so small to me, especially what happened back in 2015 and 2016. I felt like nothing had changed back then. Like, you know, we had social media, but there wasn't much change. And she came back to me and she said, you know, I was very happy we had this conversation. She said, I have a different platform than she does. I have a different reach than she does. I have a different community, whether it's friends, coworkers, or family. I have a different reach than she does, and everyone else. And so she said, even if my voice is small, and even if it's a step forward is still a step forward to change. Mm-hmm. And that really opened my eyes. And so I started speaking out more on my social media, including Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I actually found that what she said to be true, because I started having conversations with my friends who are people of color, who are Asians, Latinx, and everything in between. And I did find that my reach was different from hers. And I was having conversations that changed people's minds, that changed my minds about other people. And that's how it went down, and how I realized that my actions do matter, and how being an ally isn't enough. Being not racist isn't enough. You have to be anti-racist. You know, that quote. And that's what I learned from that conversation.
That's great. That's great. And actually, it fits really nicely in the story spine. You know, your once upon a time as a friend of yours posted something on Instagram that caught your attention. You were living, you know, as whatever your identifier is, kind of minding your own business.
Right.
And then this post got your attention. And then every day, you know, she's doing this, and like you're starting to feel some type of way about what she's saying. So, but one day you have a conversation with her, right? And then because of that, you start widening your reach, using your voice to advocate for Black people in your own communities. And because of that, you start having conversations. And then, you know, finally there's this realization that you can make a difference, and here's how. And then ever since then, you've become not only an ally, but an anti-racist. And yeah. Right. And, you know, of course, in your own words, but
yes, you put it well. Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's great. And it's exactly the kind of stories that a lot of people will be able to connect to right now, because I think a lot of people are really becoming aware of what, you know, even, and even people of color like yourself are becoming aware of the particular challenges that have been facing the Black community since we were kidnapped and brought over to this country. So to have that awareness and hold space for that and advocate for it is a really cool thing, but not a lot of people know how to do that or care to do it.
Right.
So it could be a very timely story. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I was gonna have Mandy go next.
Hi, Laura, thank you.
Hi, Mandy.
Marilyn, hi. My story is a little similar, just because I was called by the camp that my child went to. He was 5 at the time, and he was attending a Spanish camp, which was all races, but it was learning Spanish in a camp, a summer camp. And I got a call from the camp director saying that he had told another child that he didn't like kids with, or people with dark skin. Mm. And I was horrified. I couldn't, they basically told it to me as if I should have a good answer for why he would say that, which I had no answer for why he would say that. I couldn't believe he said it, and I didn't understand it. And I blubbered something back that I would talk to him, and I had no idea what it was about. He came home, and it was the first thing we talked about. And he had said that somebody with dark skin had been bullying him. It was an older child at the school who was many years older and probably had nothing, it had nothing to do with skin color really, but the kid was much older, and they were all playing on the playground together, and he didn't want him to play basketball with him. So he told my son he couldn't play with the older group, and my son told him, yes, at that moment had chose to say that he didn't like dark skinned people because this is his experience. And I have never, I definitely grew up sheltered as far as race goes. I grew up in a very small town, Mormon town, no Black kids in my school. There were 2 Egyptian kids from my school that had darker skin, but like just a very white place to live. So I didn't feel like I understood, but I went to school, I had college, I have lots of friends of all races. So I thought that was enough somehow, that would bleed into my child, and he would also feel the same way that I feel. But I realized through it that he wasn't getting that lesson by osmosis, and that the people that were actually coming to our home with regularity were people that looked more like me. So it was a realization that it can't be just talked about, that it actually has to be an active part of our life, our lifestyle, to invite all different races to my home and make sure that he's, just basically to change, to be more active. It's still something I'm trying to work out myself, but I guess and I don't think we're great at it yet still. My point is that I'm not sure that we're making a more active effort to help him be friends with every single person and every race. But anyhow, I guess the crux, or the end of the story, I guess, would be that we all marched last weekend, Saturday, and my son wrote his own sign, saying, which again, like maybe wasn't the wording I would have chosen for him, but he wrote his own sign with his own words saying we shouldn't, it didn't even make sense. We shouldn't treat people by the color of their skin. So it was this it didn't even say, anyway, it was just the idea that he wrote it himself, and he drew a picture of a white child and a Black child holding hands, and he marched, we marched on behalf of a friend who was assaulted, racially profiled and assaulted and called a bad word, and so we marched with her at our school. And anyhow, there's not really any great lesson necessarily. I'm trying to figure out what the lesson would be, or what the ending would be, but that's the story. And he wrote a letter to the child that he, hurt, or that he said this to. And again, we took the letter the next day, and that kid didn't come back to camp. So we passed it along, trying to get it to the right. We don't know. We don't actually know if that kid ever got the letter.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's something we're still trying to figure out. Like, we bought a whole bunch of books, but books don't change anything really. I mean, they help educate, but they don't, the difference is more active than that, I feel like.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of conversations in what you just said. First of all, thank you for that story. Thank you for being someone.
So embarrassed by it at the same time.
Well, no, I don't think you should be embarrassed at all. And I actually think your son's sign is great. I mean, I totally get what that means. We shouldn't treat people by the color of their skin. I get what a kid means when they say that. He means that we should be treated by the content of our character, which is not the world we live in. But it's a really nice ideal, I think that him having that experience and coming back, or you getting the call that this was said by him to another child, is your inciting incident for this story. I don't think you need to wrap it in a bow. I love the image of him marching with his sign, but that could be, your until finally. And your ever since then could be like, ever since then, we've been looking for ways to educate our whole family about what it means to be anti-racist, what it means to live in a world with, true diversity, what it means to take action to attempt to give people equity in this world. And, not like that, because that doesn't sound as compelling, but that could be your ever since then. Ever since then is your effort to continue to strive, and the finally could absolutely be him marching with that sign. And then all your because of that's, right? Because of that, I had the conversation with him to find out where this came from. Because of that, I examined my own history with race and how, the people around our dinner table don't reflect the world that I want him to live in, and because of that, blah, blah, blah. And then you're until finally, we marched together and held this sign. And ever since then, we make it a concerted effort in our house to make these strides. And my hope is that we won't stop until, we get to a point where your family gets to a point where you understand, where you truly understand, or where your son is able to really understand what it means to live in a global world and not just whatever, hamlet you might live in. How does that sound for you?
Yeah, that's great. I am still examining my own faults in his, I have 3 children, so I'm still, anyway, I have a 4-year-old that's still just starting to come up with,
Yeah.
his own ideas about race and color and privilege, and I don't want that for us. So that's exactly right. I was so uncomfortable. It's difficult and painful that that's what he came away with at 5 years old.
Yeah. Well, storytelling that includes race will not be comfortable. The subject is not comfortable, but that's the point. It's to say the uncomfortable things so we can get through that discomfort. We're going to have to lean into it for a while. Dee Dee says, Mandy, as a Black woman, I appreciate your vulnerability. Thank you for sharing your story and doing the work to change your own and your child's perspectives. I mirror that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
It's not me. It's
That's all right. But lean into that discomfort, girl. It's not going to be a comfortable ride, but that's okay. Change doesn't happen without it, Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow. Really powerful stories. Thank you so much for sharing them. So we're running a little bit over.
Yeah.
Laura, I just wondered if maybe before we close, if you could just address that one question about how do you power through the fear of sharing your story? Do you have any comments on that?
Do you mean is it the fear of sharing a racially charged story, or just the fear, like stage fright?
I'm not sure. I think Adriana asked the question. I don't know.
Racially charged. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for coming right back with that. Boy, I made a decision a few years ago, and I actually posted this, that polite silence was no longer an option for me, because it was not impacting. I did not feel good about my participation in the world while being politely silent. So I knew, just like Mandy and I were talking about, I knew that whatever I was going to, if I was going to tell my truth about what it means for me to be a Black woman in America, it was going to be scary, and I was going to make people uncomfortable, and I was going to get blowback from it. Some people were not going to agree. People get confrontational. So I braced myself for that. I was really scared. I was very scared to publish that first piece. After that, not so much. I get a lot of feedback saying how brave my writing is. It's not that brave anymore, because I'm not really scared to write it. I was the first time. I got a lot of support. The support outweighed the detractors, probably 80-1. And it's very encouraging, and it's so powerful to have a voice, because a lot of people don't. And for me to speak my truth and to have other people, me too, me too, me too, me too, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, that gives me the fuel to go to the next time. So sometimes I'm scared, depending. Like the last article that I wrote for HuffPost was, first of all, the headline was not mine. The headline was, it never is mine. The headline is always somebody else's. They come up with the headline, but it left a lot of people hurt, that headline. And I just had to lean in and hope that they read the article, because the article was really trying to just tell what it felt like to me and not condemn anybody for their participation, however they participated. And, some people got past it and some people didn't, but I don't know. Maybe I'm becoming desensitized, and, sometimes I just don't care anymore. But I think getting through those first couple of times, you'll find so much support. People will find you to support you. Marilyn and Jeff found me to lead this class for you because of the things I was writing. So that because I have a voice and a platform, so that I could share it with you. If I had been too scared to write any of it, then we wouldn't be having this whole session right now. So it only breeds good things, in my experience. But you've got to just, what do they say? Fear is a mile high and a mile wide and paper thin. You just step through.
I think there was one more question on this topic. Oh, that's so nice. Very nice comments. Any more tips for pushing past initial fears, even if not racially charged, though, just feeling like I'm too shy about sharing a story? Yikes.
Yeah, for sure. That was also my experience. And so in a storytelling setting, sharing a story for me was all about practice, so that I didn't have to think about what I was telling. I was like someone pressed play when I got up there, and I went, and I didn't, everything was a blur almost, except for the reactions of the audience, which was so amazing. The audiences who come to hear stories are excited to hear your stories. They are rooting for you. They can't wait for them. And they don't want them to be over when they're over. It's the most amazing give and take, when you have that situation. So I absolutely was afraid to go on stage and tell that first story. Again, I leaned in, I got through it. I don't remember much of it, honestly. I watched that video with you guys, and I'm like, I was so not there until I forgot that line at the end, and I jumped back in my body, and then I turned it around. But it's scary. You know, being shy, I would start, if you're really shy, I would start with something that doesn't have stakes that are so great. But just remember, the greater the stakes, the more compelling the story, the more your audience is going to connect. You know, you kind of just have to shed all of that to get the connection that really makes for a good story. But knowing it down pat helps. Practicing it helps. It doesn't feel as scary when you've been saying it every hour for a month like I did. I was just like, I want to get it over with. Blackout, yeah. It's true. Brownout, kind of, actually. Is that it?
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, someone asked what the next steps are if you want to record. So if I might chime in.
Yeah.
Look at your email, guys. There's
a whole document.
There's a whole document
on how to record it, and then how to upload it.
How to record and upload, and then I am going to send you a Google form that'll be really simple. If you want to tag us, if you want us to share it, where you can share the link of the recording that you have made on some platform, and it actually is really easy if you're not a tech person. You got onto Zoom, so you can do it. It's literally like opening the application, opening your QuickTime, or starting the record on your phone, and pressing record, and then pressing stop. It's really not that hard. I promise you.
And if you have any problems, just hit us up. We're happy to help you.
Yeah.
And also, and just on the thing with the forum, just to be clear, the forum is really just about if you would like us to help promote you and promote your story.
Please do it.
That's
Please
all it
is. Yeah.
So
we love hearing these stories. And I think people are really hungry to hear these stories, and to have, especially now, you know, we've all been quarantined for such a long time, and to hear some of the powerful stories that were shared tonight. I mean, it's such a gift.
like I cried so many times tonight. It's like, you know,
Yeah.
it's just like we're hearing these for the first time, and it feels like, you know, these are stories that people haven't necessarily told, and it's like they're all there. Like these fully fledged stories. Like you just have to write them and perform them, and you know, the hardest part of these stories is the emotion. That's the part that everyone can tell, like when you're faking that, and like I felt it.
Mm-hmm. It's the best part of the stories is the emotion.
Yeah.
So.
And if you're afraid, I mean, I know for me, just to add my 2 cents, you know, personally, I was afraid to share my stories because I was afraid that people would judge me for how imperfect I am. And when I finally just decided that I cared more about getting my stories out there than showing my flaws, I found the opposite. That you know, just echoing what Laura said, people can relate to your experience, and they love you for sharing your vulnerability. So
people love it when you're real, and there is an audience for these types of stories. People love. It's like, you know, some people like to go for stand-up. Like there's a huge audience for live storytelling, and this is what they want. So, and
you don't have to tell it in front of a giant audience. You just do it, you and your phone, or you and your computer.
Or you and your mirror,
or if you're quarantining with one person, you know, just tell the story to that person.
Yeah.
So anyway, don't want to take up time.
I was just gonna say really quickly, if you do want more feedback on your story, I will be doing is it the 20th?
The 20th, a week.
Yeah, so it'll be a small group, and we'll be able to hear each other's stories, and they'll be a little bit more progressed, and we can fine tune them. So if you're interested in that, please join. I would love to hear some more of these stories in detail, but I hope you all record and send them to the writing pad, and let us get your beautiful faces and words and stories out there. I really think flooding, this is the time. This is the time to get these stories out. They'll never be as relevant as they are right now.
Great. Well, thank you, Laura, so much for this wonderful class. And
Thank you guys.
Thank you, everybody,
Thank
for
you.
coming.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for your, it's just the vulnerability, right, you guys? It was so beautiful.
Yeah. That's all we got. Have a great night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Bye. Oh, this is so sweet.
Oh, you guys are the best.